Before we get into today's story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd really love to know how far these stories are reaching. And if you're into love stories, tales of overcoming adversity, and heartwarming endings, take a second to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any new stories, and you'll be helping this channel grow and reach more people who, like you, love this kind of content. Shall we? Today's story is a special one. Chicago, 2024. The city was still waking under the grey, humid sky of that cold spring Tuesday. The wind whispered through the wide streets like a warning, and inside the towering district courthouse, the halls were already buzzing with the energy of another day of trials. High heels clicked quickly on the polished marble. Suited lawyers spoke loudly about case numbers, folders in hand, and phones wedged between shoulder and ear. Federal guards, jackets zipped, stood watch with stern eyes. No one looked down. No one noticed who was cleaning up behind them. Naomi Clarke, 24 years old, pushed her cleaning cart like she did every morning, with the steady steps of someone who had learned how to walk without making noise. Her yellow uniform, faded by time, clung to her dark brown skin. Her curly hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her tired yet commanding face made it clear. She wasn't there to smile or disappear. She was there because she had to be. Period. On the side of her cart, clipped by a broken plastic fastener, her badge barely showed a name. Naomi C. No one read it. No one asked. She was just another janitor in the system. But that day, something different, made her slow down. In the main lobby, 3 LED screens rotated the names of the day's defendants, like some macabre lottery. The names flashed in cold white letters, like part of a cruel game she'd long since learned to ignore. But not that day. She stopped. The cart creaked slightly. And then she saw it. Defendant. Marcus Clarke, 19 years old. Armed robbery. Room 3B. 10:30 a.m. The floor vanished beneath her. Her body froze, as if someone had turned her heart off for a full second. Marcus? She whispered the name, barely making a sound, like she was saying the name of someone who had died. The mop slipped from her hand. The bucket tipped over. The dirty water she usually used to scrub the forgotten corners of that building, now spread across the white marble floor like a living stain, dragging soap and sorrow into every crack. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the screen. Every letter of her son's name felt like a gunshot. Every word of the charge a nail in her chest. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the system saying, "Now it's your son's turn." And deep down, she knew. In that city, with that last name and that skin color, the accusation was already a sentence. The sounds around her slowly returned, like a nightmare coming into focus. Footsteps, papers rustling, laughter. Look at this. Someone spilled water. Clueless janitor. Probably saw a celebrity's name on the screen. Hey, janitor, clean that up before someone slips and sues us. She heard it all, but she didn't blink. She didn't defend herself. She didn't apologize. The whole world could have been shouting at her, but Naomi could only hear one thing: her son's name being handed over to the system. And in that moment, between the puddle on the floor and the chaos in her heart, she realized she couldn't stay silent anymore. That invisible woman, with worn gloves and calloused hands, was the only person left in the world who could still fight for him. She just didn't know how yet. The rain kept hammering the courthouse windows, as if the whole sky was trying to send a warning too. Naomi walked into the small employee locker room with short steps, barely lifting her feet, as if she wanted to sink into the floor. The room was plain, damp and colorless. Stained tile walls, a crooked wooden bench in the corner, old lockers with locks almost no one used. She sat down, hugging her knees, resting her head on them. Her shoulders trembled, but the tears didn't come. She was stuck between shock and rage, between guilt and fear. It felt like her whole body was screaming, but inside, no sound came out. Naomi was exhausted, and for the first time, she didn't know how to protect her son. Her empty gaze fixed on a random point on the peeling wall. The sound of the rain outside mixed with the distant echoes of voices and slamming doors in the hallway. But inside the room, there was only silence. A painful silence, full of questions she no longer had the strength to ask. The doorknob turned. She didn't move. The door opened slowly, unhurriedly, like someone trying not to startle her. A man stepped inside, tall, calm posture, eyes steady and kind. He wore a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up and shoes still wet from the sidewalk. He held a paper cup in one hand. The other was tucked in the pocket of his dark slacks. He stopped a few steps away and looked at her with respect. "Sorry to just come in. I knocked, but I guess you didn't hear." Naomi lifted her face, her eyes still wet. He wasn't familiar, but he didn't seem hostile either. "My name's Daniel Rivera, Assistant Public Defender." She didn't reply, just took a deep breath and looked back down at the floor. He stepped a little closer, keeping a respectful distance. "It's your son, isn't it? Marcus Clarke." At the sound of the name, she seemed to shrink into herself, like every letter weighed a ton. Then she nodded, slowly. "Yes." Daniel stepped a little closer and gently offered the cup. "It's just coffee, but it's hot, and I know you need one right now." She looked at the drink like it was something far away, then at his hand, steady, with no pressure, as if to say, "Take it if you want, if you can." She stretched her fingers. Her hands were cold, almost numb. When she touched the cup, a slight tremor ran through her arms. That simple warmth did more for her than any words had up to that point. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. Daniel watched her closely, but without intruding. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly, now looking directly at him. There was a pause. Daniel sat on the bench across from her, still keeping some distance, and rested his elbows on his knees. Then he answered calmly but with conviction. "Because I know that look. The one from someone carrying the weight of the world, and still standing." She looked away, as if she didn't want to believe it, but he continued. "And because if no one has seen you yet, I see you now." Naomi slowly lifted her eyes. For the first time that day, she looked someone in the eye with courage. What she saw in his eyes threw her off. There was no pity, no judgment. There was strength, and something rare. Truth. Time seemed to pause for a moment. The sound of the rain faded into the background. The air felt lighter, but her heavy heart started to show signs that something could change. She sat up straighter on the bench, like something inside her had just been pulled back into place. "You don't know me," she said. "I don't need to. I've seen enough. Moms like you move the world, but no one ever says it." Naomi smiled. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. A crack in the armor. She brought the coffee to her lips and took a sip. It was hot, strong, and strange, but somehow it was exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she repeated, but with a different tone now, a tone of someone who maybe, just maybe, was beginning to trust. Daniel stood up slowly. Before leaving, he stopped at the door and said, If you decide to fight for him, you won't be alone." And then he left, leaving behind a silence that was different from the one he'd walked into. Naomi stayed there, alone with the cup in her hands and her heart beating a little harder. She didn't know who that man was, but she knew that somehow he had seen something in her that she herself had forgotten existed, and because of that alone, something inside her was reignited. The main hallway on the 3rd floor was quiet, but the air felt heavy. Naomi was pushing her cleaning cart past the heavy wooden doors, heading toward room 3B, the same room where her son's name had appeared on the screen earlier that morning. Every step hurt in her bones, as if the floor itself rejected her presence. She stopped in front of the courtroom and carefully turned the doorknob. The room was still empty. Rows of wooden benches, a dark carpet with old stains, and the strong smell of cleaning products mixed with the stale dust of old paper. The courtroom seemed to breathe on its own, with walls that had heard more than any witness ever could. Naomi entered, pulling the bucket with one hand and holding the mop with the other. She adjusted her gloves, knelt down slowly, and began scrubbing the floor in circular, repetitive, almost mechanical motions. The silence in there was deep, but she had already learned that the worst sounds came from what wasn't said. That's when the back door creaked open and 2 male voices entered with the cold draft of air. They were 2 lawyers, young, perfectly dressed, folders under their arms, easy laughter and lazy eyes. "She practically lives here, doesn't she?" said the first, with a sarcastic tone barely hiding his contempt. "Think she's trying to mop her son's record clean?" The second laughed with a mocking snort. "If he takes after his mom, we already know how he'll end up. A criminal by nature." The words were thrown like knives in the dark. Naomi froze for a second. She didn't lift her head. She kept cleaning. But inside, she felt her blood boil with pain and helplessness. She gripped the mop handle tighter, swallowed hard, but didn't respond. She couldn't. Her voice didn't carry the same weight there. It was easier to swallow the poison than fight the weight of the system. The 2 men's footsteps faded down the hallway, still chuckling. Naomi was alone in the room. The sound of foam being pushed across the floor was the only noise, until she heard another door open, soft, unhurried. She didn't need to look. She felt his presence. Daniel entered silently, holding a folder under his arm, his hair tied in a low bun, and his gaze as steady as ever. He stopped at the door, took in the scene, and he saw not just a janitor working, but a woman being hurt in silence, once again. Naomi kept cleaning with her eyes down, her forehead damp with sweat, her jaw clenched. Daniel then set the folder down on the nearest bench, took off his blazer slowly, rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, and walked over to her. Without saying a word, he knelt, took the second mop from the cart, and dipped it into the bucket. Naomi, surprised, looked at him sideways, not understanding. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. He didn't reply. He simply began scrubbing the floor beside her, with the same force and rhythm, as if he wanted to scrub away not just the dirt from the carpet, but the pain that had been spilled there. After a few seconds, he spoke, without lifting his eyes. "You're not alone anymore. Not here. Not anywhere." The words hit her like a warm embrace. She felt a lump in her throat and had to stop for a moment. Took a deep breath. The tears came, but she didn't let them fall. Not in front of him. Not yet. But something changed in that moment. For the first time, someone shared the burden, not with fancy words, but with action, with presence, with respect. And as the 2 of them cleaned that dirty floor together as equals, something invisible and powerful was born right there. Not just an alliance, but the certainty that this woman would never be seen the same way again. And that man, silent and strong, would be the first to prove that she deserved far more than what the world's eyes had been willing to give her. The day ended grey, and the light drizzle had turned into a storm. Outside the courthouse, heavy raindrops beat against the windows like desperate fingers trying to get in. The city seemed drenched in sorrow, and inside the building, only a few night guards remained, along with the emergency lights and the echoes of tired footsteps. Daniel was still there. In the records room, between tall metal shelves, stacked documents, and boxes with faded labels, he was reading a thick file intently. He wore the same blue shirt from the morning, now wrinkled, and though his eyes were tired, they remained focused. The clock read nearly 10 p.m. That's when he heard the door creak softly. Naomi walked in. Her hair was down, damp from the mist that clung to the hood of the plain sweatshirt she wore over her uniform. In her hands, 2 cups of coffee and a folded blanket, the same one she used during her lunch break, hidden away in the janitor's closet. She didn't say anything at first. She just came in slowly, eyes lowered, almost like she was asking permission. Daniel looked up, surprised, but didn't say a word. He simply moved a box beside him and nodded for her to sit down. Naomi laid the blanket out on the floor, sat down next to him, and handed him one of the coffees. "I didn't bring sugar," she said, "but it's hot." Daniel smiled softly and accepted it. Hot is already a miracle around here. They sat in silence for a few seconds, listening to the rain pounding against the tall windows. The sound of distant thunder filled the empty spaces in the room. The light was dim, coming from a small lamp in the corner, which made the space feel more intimate, almost cozy. Naomi stared at the shelf in front of her, but her mind was far away. After a while, she spoke. "I was going to be a lawyer." Daniel turned his head slowly, paying close attention. "I graduated second in my class, finished before I turned 23, top of my class in criminal law. But..." She lowered her gaze. Her voice cracked. "When Marcus was born, I stopped. I couldn't juggle it all anymore. I tried to go back, sent out resumes, went to interviews. People looked at my qualifications and then looked at me, like something didn't add up, like a black single mother couldn't possibly defend anyone." She let out a humorless laugh. "I ended up taking the first job I could find. Cleaning the same hallways I once dreamed of walking through in a robe." Daniel didn't respond right away. He just took a deep breath. Then, in a low voice, like opening up an old wound, he said, "I lost my sister because of a legal mistake. She was arrested by mistake. Went weeks without a decent defense until she didn't make it. It wasn't just the system. It was the silence around it. Everyone saw it, but no one did anything." Naomi looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Then why are you here with me?" she asked. "Why waste your time on someone who's not even a lawyer anymore?" Daniel looked at her directly. His expression was steady, but there was something different in it. A kind of quiet, deep tenderness that came through the spaces between words. "Because in you, I found the kind of justice I've never seen in books." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things that didn't need to be said. Naomi took a deep breath and placed the cup on the floor. Then, hesitantly, she leaned in a little, slowly, like someone still apologizing for existing, then rested her head on his shoulder. Daniel didn't move. He just stayed there, steady, letting her lean on him. He knew. Sometimes the greatest way to love someone is simply to stay. Outside, the storm grew stronger, but inside that dark room, between forgotten files and 2 warm coffees, something new was forming, something unspoken but already true. And in that moment, Naomi, who had spent years just trying to survive, finally allowed herself to rest. The storm had passed, but the air in the city was still heavy, humid, as if it carried the remnants of something unresolved. Inside the courthouse, the pace had returned to its usual frenzy. Naomi sat alone in one of the lobby chairs, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the marble floor. She had just come from the visitation room. What she heard in there felt like it had ripped the breath from her lungs. Marcus, with his thin face and eyes far too tired for a 19-year-old, held her hands through the glass with a grip that was equal parts fear and urgency. "Mom, the video they're using, it doesn't show everything." Naomi frowned. "What?" "They cut it. The original footage showed the whole alley, but the one the court has, it only shows me running. It doesn't show the guy with the gun or the other one who shoved me." She brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Are you sure? I saw the original. Before they arrested me, the store owner had the full tape. But now, it's gone." Naomi left the visitation like she was floating. The ground felt distant. Her son's words echoed back and forth in her mind. Her world, already crumbling, now seemed to be collapsing inward, stone by stone. In the records room, Daniel was reviewing files with tired eyes. She walked in without knocking. "They tampered with the evidence." He looked up, alert. "What do you mean?" She explained everything, as calmly as she could, trying to keep the desperation from taking over. Daniel listened to every word. When she finished, he stood up. "I'm going to talk to Brian. Right now." "Daniel!" She tried to stop him, but he was already walking out. In the prosecutor's office, Brian Smith was waiting with his usual smug smile, arms crossed, leaning on his dark wooden desk, framed by walls full of diplomas. "Come to say goodbye to the case?" he mocked. "Or are you here to teach me law based on urban legends?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "If you're the one who made the original recording disappear, you're the one who should be on trial." Brian stepped closer, threatening but still smiling. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I've got friends above you, above both of us." Daniel stared him down. "And you forgot that above all of this, there's still justice." As he left, Daniel got an informal heads-up from a co-worker. He was being pulled from 2 future cases and temporarily reassigned to administrative work. Silent retaliation. Hours later, Naomi found him outside, sitting on the courthouse steps under a still cloudy sky. She approached quietly. "You really went after him?" "I did," he said without looking at her. "And I paid the price." She sat beside him. Didn't say anything for a few seconds, just looked at him. His tie was crooked, his expression tired, but he was still there, steady. "Do you trust me?" he asked after a long silence. Naomi bit her lower lip. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked quickly. "Trusting hurts more than fighting," she replied with raw honesty. Daniel turned to face her, slowly. "Then fight with me." She looked at him longer than she probably should have. There was no sparkle of promises in his eyes, no certainty of victory. But there was something stronger. Truth. Naomi then stood up slowly. She took a deep breath, looked at the courthouse, and for the first time, she didn't see just a place where her life had been crushed. She saw a battlefield, and she still knew how to fight. As they were about to leave, Naomi stopped in the middle of the hallway. Daniel noticed and turned to her. She looked at him, eyes teary but steady. "You make me want to be who I used to be." Daniel smiled, and this time, it was different. It was grateful. "Then let's bring her back." They walked side by side. The courthouse now felt smaller, because together they were getting bigger. And at the end of that hallway, neither of them knew yet, but they were about to turn the tide. The next day began under a heavy sky, thick clouds dragging over the courthouse as if they knew what was coming. The sidewalks of Chicago were still wet from the overnight rain, but inside the district court, the atmosphere was different. Tense, nervous, packed. The Marcus Clarke case had gained local attention after rumors of tampered evidence began to spread. A few journalists were there with discreet cameras and notepads. Most of the crowd, however, were onlookers and court staff, eager to watch what they called a spectacle. A black boy on trial, a prosecutor chasing the spotlight. For many, the ending was already written. Naomi was among them, but not how anyone expected. She walked into the courtroom wearing her janitor uniform, the same worn yellow one, with simple sneakers and her hair tied in a tight bun. Her face was serious, and her gaze unshakable. In the side pocket of her jacket, a white envelope. Inside, something she had hidden for years, not out of shame, but for survival. The diploma that once represented a dream, and now was her only weapon. Daniel was already at the back of the room, standing against the wall. He watched everything with his arms crossed and his heart racing. He knew what Naomi had decided, but no one else did, yet. The judge entered. Brian, the prosecutor, walked confidently to the front, adjusting his tie and flashing a smug smile to the crowd. He acted like he owned the room. "We call the defendant, Marcus Clarke," announced the courtroom assistant. The door opened, and Marcus walked in handcuffed, escorted by 2 officers. His eyes instinctively searched for his mother. When he found her, she was already on her feet. Naomi stood from the last row, took 1 step forward, then another and another. The sound of her sneakers echoed louder than any voice in the room. Some whispered. "Is she lost?" murmured a woman in the front row. "A janitor interrupting the trial," laughed a man in a suit. Naomi kept walking. She climbed the steps toward the center of the courtroom, stopped in front of the judge, took a deep breath, held her chin high. The judge frowned. "Ma'am, you're not allowed here. Return to your seat." But before anyone could stop her, she pulled the envelope from her pocket, carefully opened it, pulled out the diploma, still creased with time, and said, in a clear, firm, and undeniable voice, "I'm his lawyer." The courtroom froze. Silence. The kind of silence that cuts the air. The kind that only happens when the impossible shows up and silences even the arrogant. Brian, who was smiling just seconds ago, went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The photographers took a second to grasp what was happening, then clicked in near perfect sync. The judge held the diploma in trembling hands, read the name, looked at Naomi, then at Daniel, and back at the diploma again. Daniel, still at the back, felt his eyes fill. A warm emotion rose in his throat. He whispered, as if speaking only to her from across the room, "Now the world sees you, like I always did." Naomi didn't answer, but her eyes met his, and in that look there was fire, pain, dignity, and a courage few had ever witnessed. There, in the center of the room she had spent years cleaning, Naomi Clarke was no longer invisible. She was a lawyer. She was a mother. And in that moment, she was the only person in the room with real power. The silence that followed Naomi's 5 words still hung in the air like an invisible curtain of shock and reverence. No one dared move. Even the judge, a strict man with over 20 years on the bench, seemed unsure of what to say. That woman in the yellow uniform, the one everyone ignored in the halls, now stood before the court with the dignity of someone who knew every paragraph of the law and carried far more than a badge on her chest. But the silence didn't last long. Brian Smith stood up from the prosecution table, his face tense, his eyes blazing, as if his authority was being torn away in front of everyone. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this woman is not listed as the defendant's legal counsel. She is not officially part of the case and hasn't signed any defense documentation. This is a clear violation of court protocol." The judge adjusted his glasses and quickly flipped through the document Naomi had handed him. Daniel, who had been observing from a distance, now stepped forward, walking steadily toward the center. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "She is a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois. The diploma is legitimate, her license was reactivated last night, and the registration documents were submitted to the court system at 7:42 this morning, with my personal oversight." Brian scoffed, outraged. "She's a janitor! This isn't a reality show!" Daniel turned slowly toward him. "Careful, Mr. Prosecutor. You're about to turn this courtroom into something far worse than a reality show, into a national symbol of disgrace." The room responded with murmurs, some in defense of Naomi, others still confused. The judge raised a hand and tapped his pen on the bench. "Order in the court." But outside, the silence had already been broken. One of the journalists present had recorded Naomi's declaration on their phone and posted it on social media. In less than 20 minutes, the video had already surpassed 100,000 views. People began gathering outside the courthouse. Citizens, activists, black mothers, law students. And with them, a hashtag was born that would soon set the internet on fire. "She is more than a janitor." Within an hour, it was trending nationwide. Naomi's face, still in her yellow uniform, made headlines. Influencers reposted it. TV anchors commented live. And inside the courtroom, where it all began, the atmosphere had shifted. Tense, reversed, real. The judge suspended the hearing for 30 minutes. Naomi was taken to one of the private rooms. She was exhausted. Cold sweat covered her skin. Her hands were still shaking, despite all the strength she had just shown. Daniel walked in shortly after. He closed the door slowly and looked at her. She was standing against the wall, as if trying to hold back the collapse inside her. But he saw her, whole. Glowing on the inside, even if cracked on the outside. He approached, and without saying a word, pulled her gently into an embrace. Naomi rested her face against his chest, closed her eyes, and finally exhaled the breath she had been holding in since early morning. Daniel spoke in a low voice, right next to her ear. "Even if we lose, you've already won." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, touched his face with the tips of her fingers, softly, full of care and truth. "I didn't lose," she said, "because you stayed." A door slammed outside. An officer informed them that the judge would resume the hearing soon. Naomi took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, ran her hand over the wrinkled uniform. There was no more fear. There was purpose. Daniel opened the door and held out his hand. She gripped it firmly. At that moment, both of them knew. They weren't there just for Marcus anymore. They were there for everyone who had ever been silenced. And the next word wouldn't just be defense. It would be justice. The courtroom was warmer than usual that afternoon. TV cameras crowded the outside, reporters pushing to catch any reaction. Naomi was getting ready to re-enter the courtroom, but something in Daniel's eyes hinted that everything was about to shift. He had disappeared for almost 2 hours, and when he returned, there was fire in his gaze. He pulled her aside to a quiet corner near one of the tall windows in the lobby. The sound of the crowd outside was muffled, but steady. Daniel held a black folder in his hands with a different kind of grip. It wasn't just conviction anymore. It was something deeper. "Remember the grocery store Marcus supposedly ran from?" he asked. Naomi nodded, heart racing. "They used the footage from the front camera, but I found out that place had a second one, a security cam facing the alley. It was never requested for the case. I thought that was strange. Today, while reviewing the old records, I noticed the system only referenced one video source, and that bothered me." She whispered, her voice cracking. "You found it?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Old backup, still on the security company's internal server. Forgotten, never updated. And Naomi, it shows everything." He opened the laptop on the windowsill and hit play. The footage was grainy and old, but clear enough to reveal what everyone needed to see. Marcus was running, yes, but not alone. Behind him, an older man in a dark coat with a partially covered face held the object they had claimed Marcus was carrying. The gun. The man stumbled, dropped something, then fled in the opposite direction. Marcus, with empty hands, stopped for a second and shouted something the video didn't catch clearly, but his body language left no doubt. He wasn't the aggressor. He was the target. Naomi brought her hands to her mouth. The world froze for a few seconds. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry, not anymore. "The backup has an official timestamp," Daniel explained. "It's irrefutable." "We're using this in court?" she asked, her breath still shaky. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then said, "Brian's already seen it. He tried to pull me aside, said if we keep things quiet, he could fast-track Marcus's release, no formal trial. A graceful exit, he called it." Naomi frowned. Her voice was low but sharp. "He wants to buy our silence." Daniel nodded. "He even offered me a position, said you could avoid unnecessary exposure." Naomi stood silent for a beat, then lifted her chin and said firmly, "They can't buy my voice. It costs too much." Daniel smiled, not a light smile, the kind of smile you give when you witness someone becoming exactly who they were meant to be. The woman who used to clean the courthouse corridors now walked above them. Minutes later, the video was officially submitted to the prosecution and the judge. The media got hold of it soon after. The footage exploded across social media like a bomb made of truth. It aired on late-night news shows, was shared by celebrities, and quickly became the most talked-about video of the month. The hashtag that already ruled the trending topics gained a new wave of momentum. She is more than a janitor, and now also #free. Marcus. When Naomi and Daniel stepped out of the courthouse that late afternoon, a crowd was waiting. Phones raised, homemade signs, and eyes full of emotion. But they weren't looking for applause. Just truth. In the middle of the sidewalk, Daniel held her hand. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. She squeezed his hand, without hesitation. "Now we rebuild everything. Together." And in that moment, Naomi was no longer just a mother trying to save her son. She was a woman reclaiming her story, with the man who believed in her when the whole world turned its back. And the next step wouldn't be taken alone. The next morning dawned with a clear, bright sky over Chicago, as if the entire city was finally breathing again after suffocating for days. The courthouse was packed once more, but the mood had shifted. It was no longer tense. It was hopeful. People lined the courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," and "The future has Naomi Clarke's name." Reporters and camera crews created a wall at the main entrance. Inside, everyone awaited the final decision. Naomi sat in the front row, next to Daniel. She wore a simple dark blue blouse, her hair loose over her shoulders, and her face calm despite the anxiety in her eyes. Daniel held her hand, fingers tightly interlocked, steady and silent as always. Marcus, still in cuffs, sat with his head held high, no longer as a defendant, but as someone who knew he carried no guilt. The judge adjusted the papers in front of him. The prosecution had no arguments left. The video had been authenticated, the analysis confirmed, and the truth irrefutable. Brian was absent from the hearing, officially for personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew he had fallen. The judge took a deep breath before declaring, "In light of the newly presented evidence and the lack of consistent proof supporting the charges, this court declares Marcus Clarke not guilty of all accusations." The silence lasted just 2 seconds. Then the courtroom erupted into applause, cheers, and tears. The crowd outside cheered as the news was broadcast through improvised loudspeakers. Naomi jumped to her feet, rushed to her son as soon as the cuffs were removed, and hugged him tight. She was crying. Not like someone in pain, but like someone who had just won a war. Marcus hugged her with the same intensity. "Mom, we did it," he whispered. All she could repeat between sobs was, "My son, my son." Daniel stood a few steps back, watching the scene with teary eyes. But Naomi, noticing his presence, stepped away from Marcus for a moment and walked toward him. She fell to her knees, her legs giving out, overwhelmed by an emotion too big for her body to hold. Daniel dropped to his knees with her, without hesitation, pulling her close. She was trembling, and he just held her. "I love you, Naomi," he said, his voice shaking, but steady. "Since the coffee, since the silence, since the first glance." She slowly pulled her face back and looked into his eyes. There was no doubt, no fear, no guardedness, only truth. "And I loved you," she replied without hesitation, "when you offered me a coffee like I mattered." They looked at each other for a few seconds, as if time had stopped around them. People were cheering, journalists filming, the chaos of victory spreading like fire outside. But between them, everything was still. A silence full of meaning. The kiss was discreet, calm, unhurried, but eternal. It wasn't for the cameras, it wasn't for the public, it was theirs. In that moment, in the middle of a courtroom that for years had been a symbol of pain, injustice, and invisibility, a new life was beginning. Not just for Marcus, but for Naomi, and for Daniel. Because now, they were no longer survivors. They were builders of something greater, and that something began with love. Time passed, but the marks of what happened in that courtroom didn't fade. They bloomed. Months after Marcus's acquittal, the setting that once represented silence, exclusion, and pain had become a seed of living, active justice. Naomi Clarke, the woman who once pushed a cleaning cart through the halls of the system, now walked through those same doors as a symbol of transformation. Outside the Chicago courthouse, a new bronze plaque had been installed in a prominent spot. On it, a black and white photo showed Naomi smiling, her head held high, her posture no longer burdened by shame, but filled with purpose. The words engraved below in bold letters read, "She used to clean the floor, it's her. Now she's cleaning the system." Every day people stopped to take pictures there. Some smiled in reverence, others cried in silence. Inside the neighboring building, on the second floor of a newly renovated community center, the Clarke Rivera Foundation was in full operation. It was an organization founded by Naomi and Daniel with the goal of offering free legal guidance, psychological support, and educational opportunities to vulnerable youth. And who was in charge of youth programs? Marcus. No longer the scared boy from before, but a young man with steady posture, a firm gaze, and a clean soul. Naomi moved through the rooms with folders in hand, giving directions, listening to stories, gently touching shoulders. Her hair was always loose now, full and unapologetic. Her clothes were simple but elegant, and her presence impossible to ignore. Daniel watched her while signing some documents in his office next door. He was the same at his core, but now a man with roots. The one who once hid in the shadows of the system was now standing beside a woman who made sure no one was ever overlooked again. That same month, Naomi and Daniel were invited to participate in the signing ceremony for a new state law, a proposal born from Marcus's case, requiring mandatory auditing of security footage in all legal proceedings involving vulnerable defendants. The law was symbolically named the Invisible Truth Act. The ceremony was held in the main auditorium of the University of Chicago. Naomi wore a deep navy blue dress, her hair in soft waves. Daniel, in a light suit, stood beside her with a quiet smile. When they stepped onto the stage to sign the document, the audience fell into a near reverent silence. After the signatures, the governor greeted them, and the crowd rose in applause. Naomi, visibly moved, turned to Daniel, still holding the pen, and whispered in his ear like someone sharing the most beautiful secret of all. "I didn't know it was possible to love and be loved at the same time." Daniel smiled with glistening eyes, gently placed his hand on her face, and replied, "With you, it's the only thing I know how to do." They looked at each other for a moment. The world around them buzzed on, the crowd clapped, the flashes fired. But right there, in that intimate moment before everyone, it was as if time had stopped again. And unlike the first time, in the locker room, over coffee, in the courtroom, now they were standing side by side, steady, complete. Their love wasn't born from promises, it was born from struggle, and it grew stronger with every injustice they overcame. The woman who was once invisible now inspired thousands, and the man who believed in her now walked by her side. Because in the end, when the truth is spoken out loud, it can no longer be ignored. And when love is built with courage, it does not fall apart.